Yep, that's live now.
Excellent. Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening to members of the panel, to public that are watching, to councillors and officers this evening. So welcome to the Environment and Sustainability panel on the 28th of January 2021. I'm Councillor Mark Corey. I'm chair of the panel and also leader of the Borough Council. I represent Wivenhoe Ward, and I will come to the other councillors in attendance to introduce themselves shortly. This meeting is being held remotely in line with the provisions of the regulations set out by the government in order to enable local government decision-making meetings to be held remotely. The meeting is being broadcast on the Council's YouTube channel, and the meeting will also be available to view on the YouTube channel afterwards. Councillors and officers taking part in the meeting are requested to mute their microphones and also to put their cameras off until they're invited to speak. That's the visiting councillors. Councillors taking part in the meeting and officers taking part can keep their cameras on. When speaking, please speak clearly and slowly so people can hear you. Please indicate to speak by using the raise hand function and introduce yourself when you do. So I am chair of the panel. I'll now go around to the other members and ask them to introduce themselves. We have one substitution this evening, Councillor Hazel, if you can just explain that when I come to you. In alphabetical order, Councillor Hazel, you are first, then Councillor Chillingworth, then Councillor Davidson, then Councillor Gocher, Councillor McCarthy, Councillor Scordis and Councillor Whitehead. Councillor Hazel, over to you.
Good evening, Chair. Good evening, panel. I'm Councillor Pauline Hazel, Shrub End Ward, and I'm substituting for Councillor Nigel Chapman this evening.
Good evening. I'm Councillor Peter Chillingworth. I'm Vice Chairman of this panel and I represent Rural North.
Robert.
Good evening, Robert Davidson. I represent Mersey and Pyfleet Ward and I'm a councillor on the environmental panel.
Thank you, and also our Mayor, so welcome. Mark.
Good evening, my name is Mark Gocher. I'm Councillor for Castle Ward.
Good evening, I'm Councillor Sam McCarthy and I represent Shrub End Ward.
Lee Scordis, Old Heath for Hive and Rowhedge. Yeah, that's all. Thank you.
Councillor Lorcan Whitehead representing Newtown and Christchurch Ward.
Thank you all, and I think we have two councillors visiting this evening to speak, Councillor Tim Young and Councillor Tim Young. We'll see them later. So I will introduce now the officers. We have Rory Doyle, we have Mandy Jones, Maggie Ibrahim, Ben Plummer, Dan Gascoigne, Emily Harrop and Karen Syrett. Can I ask you to introduce yourselves in that order, please? Rory?
Good evening, panel. Rory Doyle, Assistant Director for Environment.
Thank you. Mandy?
Good evening, panel. Mandy Jones, Assistant Director, Place and Client Services.
Thank you. Maggie?
Sorry.
Sustainability and Climate Change Manager.
Sorry, Maggie, didn't hear you so well then. Can I just ask and ask others to mute?
Good evening, Maggie Ibrahim, I'm the Sustainability and Climate Change Manager.
Thank you, Maggie. Ben?
Yeah, Ben Plummer, Climate Emergency Officer.
Thank you, Dan. Dan, oh no, Dan can't come this evening. It's his son's birthday. Sorry about that. Emily?
Good evening, Emily Harrop, Transport and Sustainability Project Lead.
Thank you, Emily. And Karen, please.
Karen Syrett, Lead Officer for Planning, Housing and Economic Growth. Thank you.
Okay, thank you all. So with the provisions in the Constitution, if timing brings us to 8 o'clock, I will determine that we need a break to see where we are at that point for well-being. Moving on, just to introduce the work of this panel, the Environment and Sustainability panel explores the methods of conservation of natural habitats and the biodiversity that we have in the borough, and adapting existing practices and creating new ecologically diverse environments where possible. The panel encourages renewable energy generation and carbon footprint reduction in both the public and private spheres by examining air, water quality, plastic and waste reduction, and renewable energy generation. The panel monitors the progress and implementation of the Council's Climate Emergency Action Plan and regularly reports to the Cabinet and full Council. So item 2, substitutions. It is clear we have Councillor Hazel substituting for Councillor Chapman. Item 3, urgent items. This is where I've asked the panel and spokespersons to bring forward a motion to support the Climate and Ecological Emergency Bill. Now, this was put to me by residents, and in particular by Juliet Heller, who we have this evening, who's coming to speak. So I will ask Juliet to speak on this shortly, and all of the members of the panel have had this urgent item circulated to them. It's something that I thought would be best tackled here at the cross-party panel, focused on environmental sustainability and action and stewardship. And this is about national stewardship, and something I think we can align ourselves to. And if not, I suppose we could take this as a motion to full council. But instead, I believe if we can have cross-party support as a panel, we can put it to Cabinet, and then as Cabinet we can discuss and hopefully sign and agree to supporting this bill. So therefore, I will invite Juliet to speak, and then we will consider the paper and have a discussion on that. And I'm welcoming Juliet to contribute into that discussion as well during the period. So trying to be a bit more open on this item. So Juliet, please come forward and have your first 3 minutes at least to just explain why you wanted to bring this paper to me, and I'm more than happy to do so.
Great, thank you. Hello and good evening, everyone. Thank you for this opportunity to speak to your panel. I'm here to represent local members of the Climate and Ecological Emergency Bill Alliance. We're asking you to support the new private members bill before Parliament, the Climate and Ecological Emergency Bill, known as the CEE Bill. Many of us have been active on environmental issues for decades. And like you, we want to see action ramped right across the UK and globally to stop the planet from heating more than 1.5 degrees centigrade and to halt the destruction of ecosystems and wildlife. Terrifyingly, scientists now predict that we're on track to temperature rises of 3, possibly even 4 degrees centigrade above pre-industrial levels. That would bring catastrophic changes to our planet, including mass hunger due to crop failure and devastating flooding from sea level rise. We're also facing an ecological emergency, massive erosion of species diversity and ecosystem services like pollination, food and water resources. The science is irrefutable. Up to 1 million species face extinction, according to the UN. In the UK, over 40% of our species have declined since the 1970s. In the last century, 97% of our wildlife meadows have gone. To prevent these dangerous levels of warming and replenish our biodiversity, we have to take unprecedented action now. Today, the CEE bill offers a glimmer of hope, despite the dark times we live in. The bill was developed by a group of scientists, lawyers, academics, and campaigners. And on the 26th of March, it has its second reading before Parliament. What can the bill achieve? The government is way off track reaching its target of net zero emissions by 2050. A date that is far too late to avert runaway climate change. The new bill would oblige the government to develop an emergency strategy with legal obligations, including to reduce UK CO2 emissions to ensure temperatures keep below 1.5 degrees centigrade, ensure the UK's entire carbon footprint, including manufacture and transportation of goods from overseas, is accounted for, restore and regenerate our depleted soils, habitats and species, and set up an independent citizens' assembly representative of the UK's population and guided by experts to help develop coherent strategies and policies. So what do we need from you? We're asking Colchester Borough Council to pass a motion declaring its support for the CEE bill. We also ask you to write to local MPs asking them to support the bill when it comes before Parliament again. There is so much at stake. As David Attenborough said when he addressed the IPCC 3 years ago, right now we're facing a man-made disaster of global scale, our greatest threat in thousands of years, climate change. If we don't take action, the collapse of our civilizations and the extinction of much of the natural world is on the horizon. The pandemic has shown us that when governments have the political will and need to act fast and decisively, they can. The CEE bill is an important step for ensuring that our government recognises the seriousness of the challenges we face and steps up actions on the climate and the ecological crisis. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Juliet. I think many of us do agree, and we are pushing ourselves locally here, and I think it is about pushing and making sure we head towards targets that are targets that will actually change the course that we're heading in at this moment in time. So Maggie, I'm going to ask if you would be able to come forward and just explain, as you have done in writing, but also to the spokesperson's group as well, about how you feel as a council we can support this and the differentiation between that and processes already in place. We feel we need to go further. I just wondered if you could help explain that as you have done previously, if that's okay.
Start off, it's not really my position to say whether we should support it or not at this time. What I can offer is the information that I provided, and it's, I believe, a conversation to be had about whether you decide to support it. So I just want to make a clarification. Thank you very much, Ms. Heller, for outlining the situation at hand. This bill sets out changes to our existing Climate Act in 2008. So what it does really provide is, as already highlighted, a couple of things that bring us closer to achieving our ambitions for carbon reduction. So primarily, the main differences will be around setting up the strategy, setting up an office to deliver that strategy, and that would be accountable by the Prime Minister and the Secretary of State. It would also ensure that the strategy was updated after a citizen assembly so that good practice can be taken up to achieve the goals. There's also details around what we can and cannot consider for carbon offsetting. So that is not explained at all in our current act. So this really, as suggested, provides a way for government to legislate to achieve the carbon reduction goal. So that's what's being proposed here. It's what is really being proposed is we have a 2008 act. We need to improve that act in order to meet our ambition. What the consequences will be from following through on that process from a bill to an act will have to be discussed in Parliament and debated. So that's what I can offer you to date.
Thank you, Maggie. I just know you explained it very well and succinctly, and I just wondered if you could do that this evening. So thank you for doing that, and it really does put into words and clearer for us that it is actually saying, right, we need to not just have targets and aspirations, and it's very similar to what we've done locally. We passed a climate emergency bill, in a sense, our motion, and now we need some clear actions, which we've done locally in terms of our action plan and having both a strategy and a plan. So I believe that it would be useful to support this bill going forward. We're not going to move mountains, but it's about working collectively, and a collectivist approach is what we need to tackle the environmental challenge that's ahead of us. So that's why I brought it here this evening, and hope that councillors can support it. So I did see Councillor Chillingworth, your hand go up, but then it went down again. But Peter, do you want to come in and speak?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I couldn't see if my hand is still up, but it should be. I'll put it down later. There were 2 points. First of all, on the report that Maggie has just read, at least presented, in her written example, she said that the environmental minister supported this bill. I have to disagree. He has actually spoken against this bill, which is unfortunate, because I felt that if this did have cross-party support, there would be no problem. But that isn't the case, I'm afraid. The government do not support it. They see this as something that is actually going to get in the way of what they're trying to do. The environmental bill has been delayed, and I don't know if this is going to make any difference to the second reading of the CEE bill. Can anybody enlighten me before we go on?
Thank you. I think first of all, and Councillor Hazel, don't let me forget you. I saw your physical hand go up. You'll be third in the queue. So I think that perhaps the misinformation there by mistake in the report might be that a quote about the Environment Minister supporting his own bill, the Environment Bill, rather than this one, which goes further. I don't know, I can't answer, and I don't know if officers can, to say where this is placed and how that would affect the Environment Bill that's been delayed. I don't know in terms of the parliamentary process with that, what would happen. And I don't see anyone jumping in, unfortunately. I think that I have got Mandy Jones as an officer. Could you come in, Mandy? Have you done the research?
No, I mean, I think that's what I was about to say. So I'm sorry, I'm not going to give you a more positive answer, but I think, you know, we haven't had that time to be able to consider it in that detail at present. So I was just going to say, you know, that's probably, you know, something we'd probably need to do in future to look into that. But yeah, this didn't come through Maggie. Maggie was just giving some explanation of what she'd done in terms of reading the bill and outlining it. So yeah, this is obviously not come through Maggie's report.
Thank you. I would say that it's part of the bill is to add to what the Environment Bill is saying, and that's been delayed at the moment. So I wouldn't see, in my opinion, that it would harm it. It would extend it. But that's a matter for the parliamentarians to work on. I would say that as this, we could put it to cabinet and get that absolute final answer between that period of time before cabinet sign it off. But I think it's more a position of pushing the government to go further, and in a sense they could incorporate some of the CEE bill into their Environment Bill. So I have Councillor Lorcan Whitehead, then Councillor Robert Davidson, and then I've got Councillor Hazel and Peter. I think I might bring you back as well, unless that was an old hand. So Lorcan, please.
I think Councillor Davidson might have been indicating that he could shed light on the issue we were just discussing. So I'm happy to give way to him to speak before me, if that's, since it's relevant to the point we were just discussing.
Robert, yes, over to you. The Mayor can always jump the queue.
Thank you. I'm not the Mayor tonight, so thank you, Councillor Takori. No, just to say that quite sympathetic to Juliet's views, and all of us, of course, want to improve the environment and minimise climate change as soon as possible. But yesterday, the bill was withdrawn from Parliament, and the reason for that is twofold. Sorry, I've done some research on it. And it was bringing in legal targets for air quality, biodiversity, water quality, waste reduction, and others. But it's now going to be brought back to Parliament in May and expected to get royal assent by the autumn. And the reason is that MPs, and this is quoting from Juliet's website, MPs from parties including Labour's, Greens and Conservatives are all backing various amendments to the bill relating to levels of air quality targets, food import standards, protection for species, removing deforestation from supply chains, and rules on toxic pesticides and planning permission, amongst others. And I think that's the whole point, that the government are determined to hit the climate change target they've set for 2030. And as you know, you've got the COPA 21 conference coming up in the summer. So the government will be wanting to have something on the table before that to show that they really mean business. So for me, we can discuss it tonight and we all want to improve standards, but actually until we've got the improved version on the tables where we can see how much progress they are prepared to make, we can't really make a constructive comment. That's my view anyway. Thank you, Chairman.
I just want to check, because I just looked myself. Do you mean the Environment Bill has been withdrawn, or the CEE Bill? Because the CEE Bill, to me, it seems is still there. You might be saying that the Environment Bill has been withdrawn in order to improve upon it. I would say, I think I'm confident that if we gave support to this one, it would be about showing to the government that we want to go as far as possible, and they should incorporate some of the parts of this bill into their legislation as well. I just feel we can't delay, or the government shouldn't delay any further, and I hope they do bring it back as soon as possible. I'll come back to Councillor Whitehead and move down the speakers at this point.
Thank you. Yes, I mean, I fully support us supporting this motion, this bill. I mean, I think we've talked in this group many times about how we need additional support. Really, there is a lot we can do locally, but there is a lot more that we need to do, and it's very difficult, I think, for local authorities to take the scale of action needed without central government support. So I think we do need that additional support from the central government, and I do think we need to, you know, this would be a useful step forwards in making some of that concrete, and some of that may well filter down to our level. So yes, I think we should support it, and I do agree that it's about adding our weight, I think, to the calls for this to be put into action. And I think the fact that it doesn't currently have cross-party support makes it all the more necessary for us to add our weight to the voices calling for it. So I would support it, absolutely.
Thank you. Next I have Mark, please. Councillor Gocher.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I also support the motion that we should support this bill, because it is impossible to divorce local initiatives from the national and global picture. And I think if we're serious about the climate emergency, we need to be supporting national initiatives like this to push the government to go further. I mean, the bill is, one of the positives of the bill is it's not just about the climate emergency, or that's the main focus. It's also about the ecological emergency as well. And it has sections in it about air pollution, which is something that I've, you know, it's dear to my heart as a campaigner. And I think that it's important that we as local authorities are a force that is prompting the government to go a bit further, rather than sitting back and waiting for them to do everything themselves. And I think that's a real force for good. So absolutely, I think we should be supporting this. I mean, it's not perfect. I've had a look at the bill, and there are things that I think are not strong enough. And my overall feeling of it was it's a very, very moderate bill. So I hope it does get cross-party support finally. But absolutely, I think we should be supporting this. Just basically making a statement as a local council that we feel that the government needs to get cracking.
Thank you. Cracking, not fracking. Absolutely. I will go to Councillor Hazel before I forget. That was her physical hand went up, so I'll come to you, and then I will bring in Juliet again, and then I'll come back to Councillor Chillingworth. Pauline.
Thank you very much, Chair. Unfortunately, I've lost my remote hand. All I have is mute me or unmute me. So apologies for that. Yes, this is such a serious issue it's a global issue. And interestingly, reading on the agenda, the 6 paragraphs, the terms of reference, there's not much one could be against in that, because it's talking about local and what we can do as a local authority and individual. And I'm very much on that. I really do believe that it's up to each and every one of us to do what we can. We can reduce our consumption of our resources. We can recycle, repair, maintain. We can do our bit. And I think working locally and getting everybody we can think of to join us is a very positive thing. But I think this bill, in my opinion, is not needed. It's premature, and it will simply add layers of bureaucracy on top of what we already have. And layers of bureaucracy hinder rather than help. I disagree to a degree with Councillor Whitehead when he said that as a local council we can do little, we need the government. Well, I don't agree with that. Locally we can do a great deal, and we should be doing. And yes, we can push the government and we can make our voices known, but not through this bill, in my humble opinion. And a lot is being done. The government is already working. There's a lot of work underway. Councillor Gocher mentioned what did he say? Was it an ecological emergency as well? Well, yes, it is. But the government is spending over the next 5 years £3 billion, at least £3 billion on these issues. The UK already has 357 marine protected areas. That's already being done. And I do agree with Councillor Davidson that, in my opinion, we need to wait for what the government is proposing. I'm actually confident that they are on the ball, and they realise, as each and every one of us must, of the danger we're in. But I do believe that individually we can do a great deal, and I can't vote for this bill, but I can vote for the terms of reference that's given in front of us today, that we should all work very hard together to do those things we are asked to do in that terms of reference. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Hazel. That terms of reference does talk about stewardship and leading, not just in our borough, but beyond. And I feel we have to here. I was with you halfway, and then you said you weren't supportive of this. And I actually feel that the government needs our support to push it in the right direction. We've seen comments from the Prime Minister before he was Prime Minister that he'll lay down in front of the bulldozers for Heathrow, and that hasn't happened. That's going ahead now. And HS2 seems to be biodiversity and ecologically destructive. There's a few projects I think the government hasn't fully taken into account yet, the urgency. And I don't think we can wait for the government to come back with its bill. I think this is the right time now to support the CEE bill, to then ensure that the government meets those similar targets. I agree with you, bureaucracy, extra layers is not useful, and we're seeing that at the moment as a result of the current EU deal, which is not helpful for industries, and we don't want to add anything to that. But we do need to hold the government's feet to the fire. We need to hold our own feet to the fire, and that's what our terms of reference does. And our terms of reference, as I repeat, talks about going beyond the borough as well. So I am supportive of this. I'll go back to Juliet and then to Peter. So Juliet, please.
Yeah, I was just going to come back initially really on the technical point about the Environment Bill. So as far as I understand, that was only announced a couple of days ago, actually, that the delay was happening for 6 months. The Environment Bill will be shelved effectively, I understand, mainly because of COVID, which is a real disappointment, obviously, because that delays, as we know, we've got the November is when we have our COP26 meeting, so that delays for, as I understand it, 6 months actions that need to be taken, so that is a concern. But I do see, I think, like Councillor Corey, that the two things run in parallel with each other. So waiting on the bill might be a bit problematic, but I think it's very much about legislation and taking things further than just pledges and the 2050 target. So the CE bill is really setting things down in much more detail and putting it into law as opposed to pledges, which don't have to be kept to.
Thank you. I think in terms of pledges, that is the concern. As you say, they're not kept to. We need much more stringent targets. And I think even if this bill goes forward, it has cross-party support, but not yet from the government side, that even if it doesn't pass, it could be that it does form part of the Environment Bill. It does help to improve the Environment Bill. So hopefully that's where I come from. It doesn't take away from what's being done. It can only add and can only push us in the right direction. That's my point. So I'll come back to you, Peter, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Juliet, we are on the same side. Nothing of you've said do I disagree with, except in the means. We have a government who is trying desperately. You may not think it, but they are taking extreme steps to implement ameliorating climate change. I think we'll see during the year, now that there's new leadership in the United States, that our country, together with the United States, will lead the world towards a better environment. That's a bold statement, I understand, but the government is really serious about this. And the delay in the Environment Bill may allow certain elements of this private members bill, which fit in with the Environment Bill, to be added. The extra time may be useful. We are making progress. We shouldn't forget it. I was reading today that in 2020, 17% of our electricity was generated by nuclear power, 42% by renewables, and 41% from fossil fuels. Now that's great progress. The government has also has a target, I believe, of 2035 for electric cars. So we are moving in the right direction. We'll be talking about building regulations shortly, but that is, again, an element where the government is moving forward. And I believe our government is doing what it can, and this members' bill is a distraction, and I don't support it, I'm afraid. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Peter. If there's no other people down to speak, I'll just say a few final words, then I think it's best to move to a vote on this. I would say that it can only add to the government's agenda if we believe that they're going in the right direction. I do feel that the way that nature and our climate is working is exponential in a decreasing and depressing state for our planet. So we need to act in the same way, and we can't wait any longer. So I do feel that this is an addition and can help and would not get in the way. If anything, it will add to and improve upon what is being done. So I would want to add our support. That's my personal view. Therefore, I can't see any other speakers. We do have Councillor Robert Davidson again. Robert.
Sorry, just briefly. Yes, thank you, Chairman. You're absolutely right. The Environment Bill has been withdrawn, not this one. My key point really to make is that the Environment Bill has been withdrawn because actually it is going to set legal targets for all these things that we're so concerned about. Whereas this well-meaning bill that has been put forward before Parliament, as you say, will focus on the issues, but it will not necessarily hold the government to account as the Environment Bill will. So I'm just not sure what this bill will achieve in the bigger picture.
Thank you. Well, I believe it will hold the government, rather than the government just setting its own goals. I think it's much better to set those goals written by the scientists and for the government then to respond. If it goes further in the Environment Bill, great, we've done our job, or they've done their job and we've supported them in that. I really can't see how this will take away from that process. So for me, it's a positive step. And if the government come in and do the same thing, great. If they go even further, acknowledging the work that's been done by this private members bill, then even better. But I do feel that there is a lot more work that needs to be done. We're doing it here. And of course, I think we've got more to do here as well. So I'd appreciate, even if this bill comes into action and the government bill too, and they pass down to us requirements that we need to push forward, and even this bill that we support makes us have to do more, I think we've got to do it. I'll take one last speaker. I've got Councillor Gocher again, so and then we'll go to the vote.
Yes, I mean, Chair, you've just basically said part of what I was going to say, but I just don't see what the contradiction is between supporting this bill and hoping that the government revise the Environment Bill to make that better. I don't see how the two things are somehow clashing with each other, because the purpose of this bill is to put forward targets that are pushing the government along. And if the government incorporate those targets into the Environment Bill, well, that is excellent. But the purpose of this bill is to confirm that we believe that targets should be this, this, and this, and to give the government a push. And I don't think it's necessarily contradicting what the government are trying to do with their bill. And I'm just wondering what the fear is that is in this bill, that is somehow going to upset the government's apple cart, because I don't see how they're contradictory.
Thank you, Councillor Gocher. Similar views to me on that one, but I understand other members and how they've conveyed their thoughts on this. But I brought it to the panel to hope for cross-party support, but in terms of going forward, I will take it to a vote, and that will go to Cabinet. That's what I did discuss at the spokesperson's briefing, and I do think that's the right thing to do. If not, I can always bring it back as a full council motion. But I will take it at this point with no other speakers to the vote. So who am I calling for the vote this evening? Matthew, are you conducting that?
Yeah, no, happy to, Chair. Members, and Chair, if I can just clarify, what we're voting on is as set out in the urgent items section of your agenda. There are 4 motions there, which I'm right in saying, Councillor Croy, that is what we're voting on now, whether to recommend that those 4 items be approved by Cabinet at its next meeting. So that being the case, I'll call members' names. If you please indicate whether you're for or against the proposal on that basis, I'd be grateful. As just subbing for Councillor Chapman, Councillor Hazel, I'll start with you, please.
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Chillingworth.
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Davidson.
Sorry, for.
Councillor Gocher.
4.
Councillor McCarthy.
4.
Councillor Scordis.
4.
And Councillor Whitehead.
4.
Thank you, Chair. The motion is carried.
I hopefully get a vote too, and I vote.
Beg your pardon.
I vote 4.
Thank you. That confirms it.
Thank you. Well, we will therefore put that to Cabinet with those 4 points required in the urgent item. Okay, thank you for that. Thank you for that discussion. I appreciate the difference of opinions, but we will see how it goes and we'll keep updated of where the Environment Bill gets to and where the CEE Bill gets to. Thank you. Right, moving on to item 3, which I think are the minutes. Oh, sorry, that was item 3, the urgent item. Item 4, declarations of interest. Are there any? No, thank you. Moving on to general have your say. Well, I took Juliet earlier and we do not have any other speakers. So Juliet, at this point, I'll say thank you for visiting and for your contributions. You're now able to watch it on the YouTube channel if you want to, but I'll happily let you say goodbye if you.
Thanks for having me. Bye, everybody.
Thank you. Take care. So we'll move on to item 6, sustainability and planning, and we welcome Karen Syret to walk us through this paper. And thank you, Karen, for this work. We have seen you at the Task and Finish group before and talked about the really important work that planning does in terms of our future application to our aspirations of building homes that are fit for the future environmentally and sustainably. So over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me okay? Nods will do. Right, thank you. I found a couple of people a bit quiet tonight, so I wasn't sure. Right, well, I think we've already heard about the importance of climate change already tonight. And obviously the UK's got challenging targets to meet. And local plans, I guess, and planning decisions provide an obvious way people might think to be able to do that, from setting targets that promote green infrastructure to the location and design of new developments. However, as the report sets out, it's not quite that straightforward, and there's been many changes at a national level over the years which have added to that or created that uncertainty, I should say. And in the past week, the Environment Bill's already been referred to, but there's been other announcements and consultations which have, in some ways, provided a bit more clarity, actually, but they're not reflected in my report. So I am going to speak for a bit longer than I would normally, but I think it's important to understand the emerging context as well as where we were just 2 weeks ago. So, first of all, the Environment Bill has been delayed and won't now happen for until autumn at the earliest, I understand. And what that bill was seeking to do was introduce a biodiversity net gain requirement from all new development, as well as the need for councils to produce spatial strategies to protect and enhance the natural world. And these would be informed by 2 new strategies which would be produced by Natural England, these being species protection strategies and protected site strategies. In addition, the legislation, as Councillor Davidson said, would put in, enshrine really key environmental targets into law. And would also establish a new environmental regulator. So this is all promising, but as we've heard, delayed. So in 2019, the Ministry for Housing, Communities and Local Government published a consultation on future housing standards, future home standards, via the building regulations, which would set updated targets for energy efficiency in new homes. As part of a consultation, the government sought views on whether or not to restrict planning authorities from setting higher energy efficiency targets in local plans, or whether they should in fact leave it to building regulations. And we've had this uncertainty for probably a couple of decades, if I'm honest. In 2015, there was a deregulation initiative, and the government did do away with an awful lot of legislation, and they announced their intention to remove the council's ability to set higher targets in planning policies. And although that target, it was passed in regulations but didn't become legislation or something like that, it did set out intended policy and the way of thinking. So most councils avoided anything which might then cause a problem at local plan examination. A response, however, published last week to the 2019 consultation recognised that there has been confusion and uncertainty for both local planning authorities and builders. So they recognise there's a need to provide local authorities with a renewed understanding of the role that local authorities are expected to take and to assist in creating greener environments and communities. So to provide more certainty in the shorter term, the government aren't intending to amend that part of the Energy Act from 2008, which means local planning authorities will be able to set higher standards. And they've made it clear that that's in the shorter term. Now, I'll come on to that later in terms of how that might reflect in Colchester, because I think it's the shorter term because of the intention to introduce new building regulations. The document also goes on to say, reflecting this, that as we move to ever higher levels of energy efficiency standards for new homes with updated building regulations and future home standards, it is less likely that local planning authorities will need to set local energy requirements in order to achieve the net zero goal. And the response to the planning white paper, which we expect at some time, will provide more certainty on this. So I think that short term really is short term. At the same time, consultation commenced on changes to Part L, which is conservation of fuel and energy on power, and Part F, ventilation of the building regulations. It sets out proposals for a future building standard, which is intended to provide a pathway to highly efficient non-domestic buildings as well. And according to a statement issued by the Ministry, the consultation response has set out plans to radically improve the energy performance of new homes, with all homes to be highly energy efficient with low carbon heating and zero carbon ready by 2025. They've also said that as we move to ever higher levels of efficiencies, it's less likely that local authorities will need to set policies. So where does that leave us? Well, we have got policies in both the adopted and the emerging local plan on climate change. And these policies encourage and support the provision of renewable and low carbon technologies. They encourage new development to provide a proportion of energy demand through renewable or low carbon sources, and to provide and to encourage design and construction techniques which contribute to climate change mitigation and adaptation by using landform, layout, building form, design, tree planting, etc., to minimise energy consumption and provide resilience to a changing climate. Within the garden communities policies, this encouragement and support changes to a requirement, and more detail will follow in that in the garden communities DPD. So when it comes to renewing or reviewing the local plan, and I know we haven't adopted this one yet, but it's going through the examination process, but believe me, that time will come much quicker than anyone thinks, really. That I see as the opportunity, if it's required, to implement new policies and to seek policies that go higher than what we're expecting or what building control are going to require. And I say if that is required at that time, because I've always been a firm believer that building regulations are the way to make things happen in this respect, because they're non-negotiable. And building regulations tend to be under everyone's radar because they don't come to committee, because there's no decisions to be made. You have to, if you're building something, you have to comply with the building regulations. So for me, having something nationally set through those is a far safer and robust way of achieving what you want to achieve. We need to get the emerging local plan adopted, and then it might be possible to look at supplementary planning document or provide some additional guidance in the short term, which will again be as much about promoting new ways, new technologies and different things that developers and builders can do. And we did have one a few years ago, and it quickly became out of date, but we could do something to update that. But what I would say is supplementary planning documents can't set new policy, they can only provide more detail. We're not alone in being deterred from having ambitious targets. That's been commonplace across the country because of this uncertainty that's existed. What we are looking to do short term is introduce the checklist, which is attached to the report. And this will at least make people think about what they're doing when they're submitting a planning application. It will also enable us to report to planning committee on applications and advise members of what elements are being incorporated into any scheme. So we're intending to consult on that along with a number of other changes to the local validation list, and that is a requirement that we do that. But we're ready to go with that soon, and then we can look to adopt it once we've carried out that consultation. So I think that's all I intend to say at the moment, but I'm happy to try and answer any questions that members have. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Very helpful. Lots of information there to take on board. And I think there's some ups and some downs, really, in terms of some steps forward, some steps back, some delays that I really personally get frustrated when I see housing developments going ahead today that see no standards really advance from the 1990s in terms of building design and in particular quality in an ecological setting in terms of making sure they're more sustainable and less of a carbon footprint to them. So for me, it's about time that we got those building regulations absolutely up to speed, up to the 21st century. But I appreciate you've covered a lot there, and we need to sort of pick through that and work out how, again, you talk about our local plan, how that incorporates as much as we possibly can locally, as other councillors referred to earlier. Thank you for that, Karen. I will go to Councillor Chillingworth, then Councillor Schoolis, then Councillor Gocher. So Peter first, please. Whilst Peter unmutes.
Sorry about that, Chairman. My screen moved and I couldn't find my mute. Anyway, thank you, Karen, for that presentation. I found that very helpful. I wanted to raise the consultation, the review that you referred to, because I didn't think it was mentioned in the presentation that came with the agenda, because I think it's very important that we try to persuade. And I think that's the only way to do it at this stage, developers to move rather quicker than being required to do by the building regulations. We all know that houses being built today will need to be retrofitted. We know that they won't have the required ventilation and insulation. They won't have the appropriate heat pumps, for instance, for heating. All those will be added, they'll have to be added by the owner in the years ahead. And I think it behoves developers to appreciate that. Even if they have to charge more for the houses, they will be saving their purchasers money in the future. Not only that, these houses will be much cheaper to run. There is a very good example, which I'm sure you know, at Cannock Mill, where zero carbon housing have been built, are being lived in, and are being enjoyed both physically and financially by the owners. I was hoping that your checklist, which I fully support, could be linked to a rather quick update of the sustainable construction supplementary planning guidance to push developers. I think you're right, we can't impose higher standards. It's only in the short term anyway, but we can persuade. And I think your checklist gives the entree to do this, and it can be expanded on in the supplementary planning guidance. I appreciate this is another task for your team who are under pressure in other ways at the moment. But I do think this is important to do. Housing for the future is one of the great expenses of the nation, not just to the nation itself, who will have to provide financial support, but also to every purchaser and every house owner. The housing we have in this country, so much of it is way, way down on what will be needed in the future. And the cost of bringing this up, retrofitting it, will be colossal. So I do think we should make sure that developers appreciate this and bring the standards up voluntarily. But anyway, I do support you, and certainly with the proposal for a checklist, that is a good start. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. I think the checklist is a really good start. I completely agree with you. And hopefully in those DPDs, we can go even further to make sure. I think we do need to go further than just relying on voluntary. But I will go to the other speakers. So I've got Councillor Lee Scaldis, Councillor Mark Gocher, and then I'll bring in Councillor Hazel, and then I've got Councillor Lorcan Whitehead as well. Lee, please.
Thank you, Chair. Good of Councillor Chillingworth to mention Cannock Mill, which is a very good example for any planner looking to create a community. It's an excellent initiative, and even though they've only just moved here when COVID hit, they've actually all banded together. So it's been very successful so far. And a very important topic, as Councillor Chillingworth has highlighted, around housing regs and having a lot of new build in my ward. We see a lot of issues with the developers, and sadly it's the affordable housing that gets left behind when it comes to some of the more energy efficient needs as well. But one question on this, Karen, does this cover properties that pass through permitted development? So essentially those offices that don't have to have proper planning permission.
That, Councillor Scaldis, is an excellent point, one that I would absolutely back up and did have down to mention. So thank you for bringing that up. I will come back once I've done the rest of the councillors, Karen. So hopefully you're noting the suggestions and points down, absolutely back up that point about permitted development. We know the planning laws and how it doesn't need to, it doesn't require planning, but I think this checklist and some of our advice needs to be taken on board. Councillor Gocher, please.
Thank you. Yes, I mean, I totally support the checklist, and I'm going to be voting for it. I think it's a good initiative. There have been some terrible developments in Colchester. I mean, I've been notified about developments where there are literally no pavements. The road stops and there's the door of the houses, which is obviously designed to facilitate greater car use. Terrible designs. So anything we can do to make developers submit a checklist and therefore think about these matters before they submit the application, that's to be welcomed. I mean, from my point of view, there are reservations I have about the whole approach, but absolutely I support this particular checklist. But my reservations are that it is part of a growth agenda, and my party, certainly people within my party, will challenge the growth agenda. And this is designed to facilitate a growth agenda. What it's saying is we can keep going as we are, but we can modify what we're doing to make it carbon neutral and greener. We have a finite planet, and nobody has ever told me when growth stops. And that's just a holistic point, but it's a point I think is very important. In terms of the checklist, I think it's a good approach to get them thinking when they submit their applications. Again, it doesn't do anything about the existing housing stock, but that's a bigger issue. But we have to obviously make new developments as green as possible. And getting the developers to think about some of these issues is important. I don't think the checklist is strong enough from my point of view, but then maybe very little is going to be strong enough from my point of view. So at least it's a start. There are areas where I would go stronger on cycling, on car use, and a particular bugbear of mine is I do not like what I call the biodiversity net gain trap. The 10% biodiversity net gain that's mentioned in the checklist, and it's something that the Green Movement has bought into, and I really don't like it because I see it as a sleight of hand. Because let me tell you why. You can take a massive field of wheat, several fields of wheat, and analyze it, and it will be low biodiversity because it's a field of wheat. And you could build houses all over it, apart from one tiny patch at the end where you stick a birch tree and an oak tree at the edge of the development, and it's a biodiversity net gain because you've replaced a monoculture crop with several trees. But what you've not asked is what could we have done to the field of wheat to make that far more biodiverse than building houses over it. So I see it as a sleight of hand. But that's just a personal opinion on one little aspect of the checklist. But I do think that this is a step in the absolute right direction, and I think I applaud the officers who spent the time drawing up this checklist. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gocher. I would say, and I don't mean to sound condescending here, but we are the panel that is looking at this, and we can change it. So when you put your views forward, I think it's useful to say, okay, how do we change it? How do you tighten it up? And you've given one example there on the biodiversity gain point, and I think we should take that on board. We're presented with papers. They are not set in stone. The point is we do discuss them. We do work out how we can improve them. And I think your points are absolutely valid. So I wouldn't sit there and say, this is my opinion, but I'd say, okay, thank you. Let's see what we can do. So I think that's absolutely the right point about monocultures and how you could diversify it by putting just something slightly different. So I do think we should take that on board, Karen, and how we can put that in to make sure it's not just a greenwash or a trap that just a slight change could work through the rules. So I know it's still just advice and guidance and a checklist, but I do think that's a really good point about biodiversity gain. And I'd happily have you come back in, Councillor Goetsch, once I've spoken to others about any other ways in which we tighten it up. It's here in front of us to improve upon, and we'll see how Karen responds to some of that. So thank you. Councillor Hazel next, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. I haven't any questions particularly at the moment. I agree with everything that has been said by everyone. Personally, I was horrified when the government withdrew certain building regulation needs. I thought that was a step in the wrong direction. And anything that we can do as a council to improve building standards and the biodiversity, everything, we must do it. And I'm very happy to support our planning team in every way I can to achieve that. I think we have, well, I don't think we have Elfrida House coming on stream soon in my ward in Shrub End, and that will be built to those higher standards, and very thankful for it. And we are doing what we can in regard to council properties. So if we can push that out to the private sector, well, all to the well and good. I will be interested to see hear what Karen has to say about Councillor Goetsch's point about the biodiversity gain, because I'm not sure how that will sit with the planning and their responsibilities, but anything that can be done will be much appreciated. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Hazel. I think you're right in what you said at the end there. So we'll see what more can be added and done. But also you referenced the work on our council housing stock, which is what we can control and what we are looking to refurbish. And that paper has gone through cabinet, not last night, but the previous cabinet, spending a vast amount of money on doing that. But also Elfrida House did go through the cabinet meeting last night, and I'm glad you want to see that built as soon as possible. It's a really good development, a safer, friendlier, greener development. Anyway, I'll stop talking about that. Thank you, and go to Councillor Lorcan Whitehead, please.
Thank you, Chair, and yeah, thank you for the paper. I mean, I think we've all talked about how important planning is as a key area for us, and it's you know, very informative to kind of hear about what is and isn't possible. I guess we have no option to use a stick around the checklist, but I'm just wondering if we have any options around carrots. So, I mean, I don't know if there's things we could do. I mean, for example, you know, using our own comms to particularly highlight good examples, or if there are things that other planning authorities are doing to, you know, praise the good examples, even if we can't kind of enforce away the bad ones.
Thank you, Lorcan. I think that's a really positive idea. It wouldn't take too much to say these are the examples we want to see in Colchester Borough. So I think that's a really good example that hopefully Karen can work with our comms team, and I'll take that forward. It's in my portfolio of communications, how we do that. I think it's a really positive, fairly simple task. Thank you for that. And lastly, I don't know if he grows carrots, but Councillor Davidson, any ideas?
I have grown carrots in my day, and whole fields of them, but monoculture is rare nowadays, I would say. Most people have a rotation. Karen, useful report. I'm just not sure your checklist goes far enough. Obviously, it's targeted towards new build and new estates, effectively, where you've got lots of housing. But can I be reassured, if you like, that the garden village principle of wide streets, trees, and grass verges will be incorporated into these checklists and our planning? But the other point I was going to make is that as it does say in 5.6 on the report, that including the conversion of existing buildings, and nowhere really in that checklist have I seen anything to encourage improving existing buildings, whether it's double glazing or insulation or solar panels or anything else. And I just think we should be, as Lorcan says, we should be proactive rather than just trying to make things difficult for people. So I'd like to think that we could actually improve building standards as well. That I remember when a few years ago when I was a younger councillor, we improved the BREEAM standards that we were aspiring to. And again, on your checklist, it just says that will it reach building standards? Actually, we as an authority should be able to set higher standards, both for new and that would also cover hopefully the permitted development extensions, because they still have to have building approval. So I'm all for energy saving and carbon reduction, and I just think we need to include the existing housing stock in that as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Davidson. I remember as a younger councillor as well being on the local plan when we pushed the BREEAM standards up. That was a real positive step. Thank you again for further challenge. And now, Karen, it's your turn to come back. A few of us have challenged there about how we could take it even further. We understand it's a checklist offering stick. So over to you, please, Karen, if you can respond.
Thank you. And I think, Mark, I remember your first committee and your first question was about sustainable development. So you might not remember as clearly, but that was the local plan committee.
Thank you.
So I'll go through these in order. So if some of the conversation goes back and forth, forgive me, but I was scribbling as people were talking and asking questions. So first of all, talk about updating supplementary planning guidance that we did have. I think that's a good idea, and I think that addresses some of the comments that other councillors made. What I would say is, don't ask me to come back to this committee in March having produced an updated SPG, because subject to full council next week, we're expecting an examination of section 2 in the spring. So the team will be focused on that for the next few months. But after that, they'll just have their feet up. I'm sure we can come to produce some more guidance that can go to local plan committee and this panel in due course. So I'm happy to look into that. In terms of the question Lee asked about permitted development, Lee is frustrated as much as I am by what's allowed through permitted development these days. And unfortunately, we have very little control over it, and can, even where prior approval is needed, we have very little we can take into account in seeking an application, even when they have to ask about it. That's where I think building control comes in, because even works to existing homes often have to have building regulations. So that sort of thing will help there. We'll certainly require the checklist for as many forms of application as we can. So if we can seek it with prior approval applications, we will do so. In terms of the checklist not being strong enough, net gain biodiversity will be a requirement of the Environment Bill in due course, and I think that's reflected in the checklist. What we could do, though, again, going back to that supplementary planning guidance, is include more information in that. And if people have views on the content of that and what we might want to be encouraging, then please let us know. Carrots, I think the comms idea is a really good one. It's certainly about pushing some of those ideas out there so people find out more, and they might think, oh, actually, that would be something good. And, you know, that looks a really good development. So I know Cannock Mill has been in the local media once or twice, and now might not be the best time to do something more, but there could be something either run by us or the local media with regard to that, and other developments, Elfrida House, as that comes on stream. I noticed there was something on the Gazette website today about the new co-op going up at Chesterwell, and that almost sort of feeds through the development itself, and that might be something we could do with Elfrida House if that is, you know, has got high sustainability credentials. There could be a running report on that, even if it's just on social media, of what's happening at any given time in the build. And then Robert commented that the checklist doesn't go far enough, and talked about garden community principles. I'm not sure garden community principles, talking about wide open spaces and boulevards and things, is the right thing everywhere, because that suggests a low density, and low density means we need to find more land to build on, and I don't think that's necessarily a sustainable option. And in some locations, high densities are appropriate. We only need to, if we were in the town hall, look out the windows and see the Dutch Quarter and the development there, which is one of the higher density developments in the borough. So I think different areas will require different approaches in terms of those builds, but some of the general design policies that we have in the local plan should address some of those requirements. And again, referring back to my original point about the SPD, and I think again that can include more detail on I've been put off by Robert's tea arriving.
No,
I've lost my train of thought. But I think again the SPD can include a lot more detail. Oh, that was the point I was going to make, including about existing housing stock. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. I think you've covered as much as you can there. I'm aware that some councillors believe that those tightening up could be done. I think if we are to ask you any more, it would have to be how specifically we do want to do that. But you've alluded to sort of SPDs coming forward within the year, about once the Section 2 is out of the way, but building on what's already there in the plan. But I think we need to be as radical as possible with our SPDs to make sure we are setting a really high standard for Colchester. And one question before I go to Andrew Tyrrell, just about permitted development and prior approval. Is there any way that we can set a higher standard for Colchester in terms of saying, yes, permitted development, yes, conversion of offices into new flats is allowed, but can we not set a standard in terms of this is a Colchester standard for when you're redeveloping in that way? I'll come back to you, Karen. I'll take Andrew and then Robert again, and we'll come back. Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you, Leader, and evening members. I just wanted to pick up from Councillor Hazel's mention of Elfrida House and the council house building, because of course Colchester's always led the way with its affordable housing programme. Back in the garage sites phase 1 that were constructed nearly 7 years ago now, although it doesn't seem that long ago, they were built to code for sustainable homes level 4 when standard was only level 3 back before homes was scrapped. That was then overtaken by building regulations back then, but now with the current stock, with our target of 350 homes before 2024, all of the current garage sites phase 2 are being built to the principles of Future Homes 2025, and that includes the use of air source heat pumps as opposed to the gas boilers. So we're trying to lead by example there as a council, of course, with the support from councillors in pushing that forwards. Elfrida House being another example, and of course Military Road. And in the phase 3 sites we've got as part of the brief from councillors to try and explore going even further still. And we're looking at sites that may be possible for things like Passive House and so on to keep pushing that forwards. And of course we've got the £4.5 million of supplementary works to push forward the climate change on retrofitting for the 6,000 homes that we've already got, to make sure that we're not just addressing this through the new build, but also going back in ways that will benefit tenants by, of course, bringing down their bills as well as the environmental gains. So there's all sorts of social environmental benefits to this. So council is very much leading by example in the work that it does in its housing programme. So I just thought it was worth mentioning that for the benefit of the public, because yourself and other councillors have pushed through quite a lot of stuff that's driving this forwards, leading by example. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. I really appreciate that. And I appreciate your work when you come to us as a cabinet. And I appreciate you saying that. Myself and Councillor Fox both are very keen when we're building our new housing that it is absolutely leading by example above and beyond the current standards. So thanks for telling the public further about that and telling the panel tonight, or reaffirming what some of us knew. So that is helpful. So that's kind of the carrot in terms of we lead by example, and hopefully others will follow. And of course we will do communications and media about those positive examples. Thank you. Robert, back to you. I hope your dinner's not getting too cold.
It is, but this is far more important, Leader. I wanted to appeal to you, Councillor Corey, in that we are going to be setting our budget at the end of this month, sorry, at the end of February, I beg your pardon. And actually hearing Karen's understandable overwork team because of the local plan, surely I think all councillors of all parties would support 1 or 2 extra staff to push this SPD forward quicker. The reason is that we're building over 1,000 houses a year, and that's 1,000 more that could be at a better standard, or we could be encouraging, you know, a better energy saving. So I just wonder if...
Robert, you've muted.
Sorry, my point is, it would be I'd be very supportive of extra funding for the planning team, specifically for SPDs, to get that going concurrently with the local plan work, which is going to take months. Thank you.
Thank you. I do support the general principle of that. That's why we have brought in new members of the team within Karen's team and within Mandy Jones's team to focus on the environment and sustainability piece. And they are doing that. And I would say there's actually a job advert out at the moment, but I think that's for a focus on garden community principles, which would involve green environmental principles at the forefront, of course. But Karen, you're best placed to answer that. So I'll come back to you on some of the comments that have been made since.
I'm probably not best placed to comment on the administration's budget, but in terms of, you mentioned about permitted development and what we can introduce locally. Our hands are tied really by national legislation when it comes to permitted development and the prior approval process and what has to be submitted and what we can take into account. So we really are restricted there.
Hopefully, so we can still give them this checklist though, and
oh yeah, yeah, certainly.
That's a positive step.
Yeah.
And in terms of, can I ask you, try and take out the politics of it, in terms of your team, and we have increased the wider team, the focus on environmental sustainability. How is that supporting the planning team and Robert's proposal in terms of what more could we do?
Yeah, the transportation and sustainability team have moved into Andrew's team, but Emily and Jane still work closely with us in particular because of the links between transportation and the local plan. I think going forward, the team will have more involvement in planning because of developing policies and that sort of thing. You know, Ben and Maggie joined at a stage where the plan had already been submitted. Examination was underway, so they've perhaps not had as much involvement, well, or very little involvement on that side of things because it's really been in the hands of the planning inspector. So I think that will become more important as once we get through this local plan process and start work on the new one.
Okay, thank you. It's something I can continue to pick up with you about capacity, and I do agree in the principle that Robert's put forward. Thank you. Okay, we've given it a good go, and we have said about how areas could be tightened, but I think overall we really think it's a good positive step forward, having this checklist. The ways in which Karen has outlined our policies are changing and improving going forward, and how we need to actually keep on our toes and contribute when the SPD work goes forward as the local plan process moves ahead. So can I ask then that we note this report? Matthew, I don't feel we need a vote on this one, but please tell me otherwise.
If you're happy to take it on assent, Chairman, I think that's fine for this item.
Okay, if we're all happy then, unless there's any other dissent or any other contributions, to agree this paper and thank Karen for her work and her presentation on this and for her future work on top of the checklist that's been created and expanding the team and looking at other ways in which we can absolutely plan for a greener future. Thank you, Karen.
Agreed.
Thank you, Peter. I see no dissent. So that's noted. Thank you. We'll move on. Thank you, Karen. Have a nice evening. So we'll move on to the next agenda item, which I just need to get back to. So we're on to the e-cargo bike library project update. So we have two speakers coming this evening, Councillor Julie Young and Councillor Tim Young. So Julie, are you there, please? And please come forward. Maybe if Julie isn't ready to come forward yet, I'll take Tim first. So I can see Tim is there. So Councillor Tim Young, please have your say. Good evening, Tim.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, and evening, everyone. Yeah, the e-cargo bikes project, I think, is a real great initiative and deserves to be supported. I think the only problem is the marketing and publicity, because until about a couple of weeks ago, I didn't know very much about it at all. So I was glad when I was contacted by Lee Pugh, who is working with officers on this project. And I hope we can do something about increasing the marketing and publicity for the e-cargo bikes, because it's a really important innovation, I think. Obviously, you will have seen the item and you've been through this a few times on this panel. I think the Environment and Sustainability Panel is a good initiative, but we must make sure that these issues are for everybody in all communities. Obviously, I represent Greensted, which is the most deprived ward in the borough. And we need to get the message out that it's climate and the environment isn't just for Guardian reading, Radio 4 listening, middle class people. It's for everybody, and we can all make a contribution, even though I think statistics show it is more difficult in deprived areas, and we need to do something about value for money and encouraging people, because they're just as interested in making their environment better in Greensted as they are anywhere else in the borough. And I think the e-cargo bikes gives us an opportunity to roll out something in Greensted that will help. I've been doing a lot of work with the food bank during the pandemic, getting food to people where they haven't got access, or they're shielding, or they're isolating, and they need the food taken to them. But because of the amount of bags and food they get, I have to do that in my car. I haven't got a push bike in my flat, so that would be difficult anyway. I think it'd be dangerous to have all these bags balancing on an ordinary push bike. So I think what the cargo bike project needs to do is, obviously they need to, if it's become a business, work with businesses to an environmentally sound mode of travel to get around. I have to use my car. As I say, it's a hybrid, but it's still using more energy than an e-cargo bike. So what we want to do and encourage is for the e-cargo bikes to be used to transport to and from the food bank, either taking donations to the food bank from people who might otherwise have to drive there, or taking food parcels to recipients. I think that's really important. There's another community group, not a charity, in Greensted called Tots to Teens, who are delivering clothes and equipment and toys to, as they say, from tots, any children, basically from birth to teenagers. And that's been written. But the two inspirational women in Greensted who run that are having to use their private cars to get the equipment to people, using up a lot of petrol and and their own petrol that they don't get. So if we can work with the cargo bikes project, roll it out, make it more widely publicly available. I know that there is the intention to use it for charities and community groups and not just businesses, because it isn't just a money-making exercise. And I think they have the capacity to take quite a lot of equipment. I know they've been doing a number of trials on the e-cargo bikes and have got around a lot of the borough. And of course, you avoid all the traffic jams, and you can use the bicycle paths and all the rest of it. So it's really important that we do this. I guess I'm interested in the council and what the council does. And I didn't know much about it until very recently. So if I don't know much about it, I guess the public won't know much about it. But the more we can get this type of method of transport out there, I think it will encourage others to do the same. And I think on a lot of occasions, they'll get their stuff quicker than if they were to use motorised vehicles. So I'm really positive about this project, about this initiative. But I think there is more we can do about communication, publicity, and also working with charities and community groups to help them and to help our deprived communities do their bit for the environment. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Tim. I'll just come back on a few of those points before I move to Julie, and I'm sure some of the officers will also add when we get to the report. I fully understand your points. I think we've done 2 press releases so far on the cargo bikes, but of course we need to get our communications even further afield than just our typical lines of communication, but it has been on social media and beyond. But absolutely, it's a fantastic project. We need to keep getting it out there, and I'm very happy to do that. I personally have done the level 3 bikeability training, which councillors could do and other organisations could do in order to be able to then use the bike. So I'm happy to help where possible. And also your point on inequality in particular, I absolutely get. And it's part of our strategic vision is not only to improve our natural environment and our green agenda, but to make our economy fairer for all, and to actually stimulate and support those who at this moment in time can't get a foothold enough in our local economy. So there are many different ways, and I won't go on and prolong the meeting, but fully understand the principle of what you're saying and how we need to do that in terms of environmental sustainability, making sure it's affordable and achievable. One last point is engagement, and this panel is working on. With our engagement, we have talked about getting to the hard to reach groups, getting to groups who may not be connected to this agenda as much, and that could include those that you talk about. So Thank you, Tim. I'll move on to Councillor Julie Young, please. Julie.
Thank you, Leader, and good evening to the committee and officers. Just moving on from the points that Tim has made, when I became aware of this project, I was really enthusiastic about supporting it and making sure we put that service together in terms of Greenstead, in terms of the food bank deliveries. I mean, Greenstead Food Bank is the second most popular, if I can use that word, food bank in Colchester, and it has an awful lot of footfall. So working with Lee and Inform, I've used some of my Essex County Council locality budget to fund Lee to do deliveries from the Greenstead Food Bank and from Tots to Teens, and he may well be turning his hand to delivering computers and IT equipment to children locally as well. And, you know, if there is any pots of money that councillors have left, I know we've got a few days left to commit our funding, that might be something that you might want to think about utilising your budgets for. And I think in terms of our fighting inequality commitments, it kind of not just about providing the bike, but funding some of those services, I think would be really important. And as Tim said, to save people running around with food parcels in cars, getting Lee to cycle them around the community will certainly save on the planet. I think, Mark, you mentioned that you've had the level 3 bike training necessary to be able to utilise the e-cargo bikes. And I share Tim's concern, I suppose, that other councillors aren't particularly well informed on this topic. Certainly I must have missed the email that invited us to do that training. I think there's only 3 councillors out of the 51 of us that have actually undertaken the training. I think it's you, Councillor Goss and Councillor David King. So if that training was offered again, as we know a bit more about it now, I'm sure there would be other councillors that would want to take advantage of that.
Absolutely agree, Julie, and please do remind me of that, and we can bring it up with our portfolio holder, Councillor Martin Goss, whose responsibility for the environment and transport come together on this policy. So let's do that again. That's one of the reasons why he was first involved. So thank you for that. I'll go to officers now to introduce the report and to pick up any of the points that Councillor Tim Young, Councillor Julie Young have brought forward. So Emily, please, are you there and able to come forward and just give us some highlights of this report that we have read and has been circulated? Over to you, Emily, please.
Hello. Yes, I'm happy to address the points that have been made through my report. I wasn't going to actually go through the report. I've actually prepared a presentation because I know that you wanted some feedback to show sort of, you know, how the bikes are being used and some feedback from the champions. So if you're happy for me to do the presentation and then I'll address the points as I talk. I think Matthew or Gillian is going to share their screen. Thank you. Okay, so thank you for giving us the opportunity to come and give you an update on the Colchester e-cargo bike library project. Could I have the next slide, please? So I think in terms of up till now, it's very much been about getting the project set up. So until Christmas, just before Christmas, we were still getting everything up and running. We're now in a position where we can start doing that publicity and communication. The pool bikes are now ready to go out. So that may be a little bit why councillors haven't heard that much about the project. So I just thought I'd start by highlighting a few of the key achievements that we've achieved through the implementation. So we have got 54 people in Colchester trained up to the necessary level 3 bikeability training, including several councillors. Those are all people who could use and access our e-cargo bikes now. 11 of the bikes and one of the trailers have been handed over to our 9 project champions who are external to CBC. 2 of the cargo bikes and 2 e-trailers, 1 of each, have been handed over to Highwoods Country Park Rangers and the Castle Park Rangers. And up at Highwoods Country Park, 10 of the volunteers and 4 staff have been trained up both in bikeability and actually inducted in how to use the bikes. The only reason they haven't been using the bikes to date is because of the restrictions and because of the limited volunteer work that they've been able to do because of COVID. To date, 1,229 miles have been ridden by cargo bike. We've tendered and let a maintenance contract so that we've got a contract in place to maintain our fleet. We've developed the branding, we've got it installed on the bike, and we've developed the web pages so that they're ready to promote the pool bikes that are available for short-term hires, and we've developed a short-term hire agreement. So all of that has been done up till Christmas. And now I thought I'd talk to you a little bit about how the bikes are being used and give you some feedback from the champions. So could I have the next slide, please? So up at the hospital, they have a butchers and bicycles, and they have a tender 1500 post and parcel. So this is one of the guys who's using the bike up there, and Mark Yearling, the travel plan coordinator, really explains in this quote how useful the bike has been and how they've been able to replace a lot of the journeys that they previously used pool vehicles for, transporting specimens and other urgent needs around the hospital site. It's also the staff that are using the bike have been really enjoying it and obviously have been benefiting from a more active way of travelling. Next slide, please. Repair, Reuse, Recycle CIC has got our largest bike. It's an Urban Arrow Tender 2500, and as you can see, it's got a double flatbed. Chris has been using it to deliver and collect bikes and part of the Route 51 project supporting NHS workers with bikes. As you can see from his quote, he previously used a vehicle and he's now only having to fuel up every 12 days instead of 5. Repair, Reuse, Recycle CIC has also been successful in the contracts for the maintaining our fleet. Next slide, please. Colchester Borough Homes have a couple of resimilar 40s. These are the smallest bike. They're not much longer than a normal bike, so very easy to use, and they still have quite a large carrying capacity. And as Andrew's quoted here, it's a very easy bike to get around town with. Next slide, please. We've already talked a little bit about Cannock Mill tonight, but Mill Wheels, their organisation that they've set up, has an e-carlo trailer on site to help them maintain their site. It's being used by many different members of the community, and as you can see, the trailer can carry a huge amount. It's very versatile. Next slide, please. The Norwegian Bakers got a unit in Wivenhoe, have a 3-wheeler Christiana. They're using their bike now 3 times a week for local deliveries in Wivenhoe, and they've also delivered to other local areas. Richard's always up for a laugh, and a post that he did on Facebook riding the bike dressed up as an elf received a lot of likes and attention, so he's been very good in getting attention through social media about the bike. Thank you. Next slide, please. Wivenhoe Town Council have an Urban Arrow Shorty and a Tender 1500 pickup, and I think it's been really transformative for Michael in that before he was doing all his work by foot around Wivenhoe, but now he's able to do the work on the bike. It's a lot quicker, a lot more efficient. He's able to carry a lot more, so it's really made a difference to his work. And I think he's probably, of all the champions, has racked up the most miles as well. Next slide, please. Colchester Bike Kitchen has an e-bullet. They provide pop-up workshops, and normally they'd have had to have carried all their tools by car. So for them, it's been fantastic to be able to turn up to do workshops on a bike when they're trying to promote bike use. Obviously, turning up by bike is a big deal and a big influencer for the people that they're trying to change behaviour. Could I have the next slide, please? Up at Highwoods Country Park, as I said, a lot of the volunteers have been trained up. They were very enthusiastic about using the bike. They're really looking forward to using it once they resume their normal volunteer duties. Kelly at the Visitor Centre is also really looking forward to resuming her educational events and can see how it'd be really useful to use the bike for carrying stuff around Highwoods Country Park instead of using a vehicle. And obviously that's sending a really good message out to the children as well. Next slide, please. So in terms of next steps, what we were going to be doing was now rolling out the pool bikes. We've already had initial interest from Colchester Borough Homes maintenance team, the University of Essex, Hugo, Ellison Solicitors, and we have a couple of months ago been having discussions with the food bank at Moorside. Unfortunately, Safe Essex Roads Partnerships are not able to provide the bikeability training at the moment because of the lockdown. So we're waiting for feedback from them, because until all of these organisations have done their bikeability training, we're not able to lend out the bikes. So that is a little bit of a barrier at the moment. However, our first customer and our first loan will be going to Lee Pugh, who has already been mentioned, because he is setting up an e-bike cargo bike delivery service under the umbrella of Enform. So if I could have the next slide, please. I'll just tell you a little bit about Lee's project. He's at the moment, he's borrowing the e-bullet from the bike kitchen in order to do some testing of routes. He's working with Ethical Life and the Colchester Food Co-op, doing some deliveries, testing routing and sort of testing timescales and things. He's going to be borrowing our Urban Arrow LG Performance, which is the bike in the middle. He's already been down to Rowan House to try it out. It has a really large carrying capacity, which would be fantastic. His project's going to have two sides. One side's going to be supporting local independent small businesses to offer them low-cost eco delivery options. And then the other side, as has already been mentioned, is about helping vulnerable residents and working with local community groups and charities to pick up and deliver essential items. So Lee's project is really, I guess it's fulfilling an aspiration that we had with the e-cargo bikes, especially in terms of supporting the COVID recovery. We'd already been in discussions with Sam at the bid about how the cargo bikes could support town centre businesses. And we're actually, Lee and myself, are meeting with Sam tomorrow to discuss how Lee's project could fit in with that. Could I have the next slide, please? So in terms of next steps, we need to support the rollout of the rest of the CBC bikes with our own team so we get them up and running. And as I said, we want to work with Enform, BID and other partners within the community to support business and the voluntary community. So that I'm certainly very happy to talk to Councillors Young about how we can work in Greensted and use the bikes with the Greensted Food Bank to further support Lee as well. Obviously, we need to get over this issue of the bikeability. There's potentially some people who've already had that training who might be able to help anyway at the moment. And also what we want to do is refine the data that we're collecting so that we can start calculating the actual reductions in emissions and carbon savings that is being delivered by the use of the e-cargo bikes as opposed to vehicles. So that's something we're going to be working on next. And I think that's it. If I could have the next slide, please. Thanks for your time. I'd welcome any questions. I'd also say that I have got Lee Pugh in the call as well, if anyone did have any specific questions for him as well about the service he's setting up. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Emily. Really good to see the examples of them taking cars off the road, vehicles off the road. So thank you for that. That brings it to life. And it's glad, I'm really glad to see people are using it despite COVID. It's still happening for work purposes, for essential journeys. So thank you. I've seen Councillor Sam McCarthy first to come in. So
Thank you very much indeed, Chair. I couldn't find my hand. I can never find it. This is really excellent. Thank you very much indeed for that, Emily. I have to be brutally honest, I didn't know an awful lot about the e-cargo bikes. I missed out on the presentation last year. I think I was stuck on scrutiny or something, whatever. but this is really excellent. It's really good to see that some businesses have started using this already, especially the Norwegian Bakers, who I love. I'm about to get an order in with those guys, but sadly I don't live in Wivenhoe, so I won't get to see them on their Christiana. But nonetheless, I just wanted to ask a couple of questions. I'm just interested to know, obviously one of the next steps is to work with Inform and Beard, and I just wanted to know what's been done with that so far, if anything, because I think it's so important that we encourage local businesses to take this up and use the e-cargo bikes. Those guys are struggling big time at the moment, and they need, especially traders, need every opportunity they possibly can to get goods and products to their customer. So yeah, what work has been done with the bid so far, or what will be happening? And with regards to the in-depth analysis of the numbers starting this month, where is that information going to be published? Will we get privy to it on the panel? And equally, will it come back to the panel for further review further down the line? Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Sam. Some good questions there. I haven't got any other speakers at this point, so I'll come back to you, Emily, straight away on that when I wait for anyone else to come forward. Emily.
Yeah. So in terms of talking to Inform the bid, the discussions are sort of in the early stages. I started talking to them both before Christmas, and then obviously we've had the lockdown and returned to homeschooling children and juggling lots of things. So yeah, as I said, I'm meeting Sam and Lee tomorrow to talk about the sort of business side of things, and I think the whole community side is something that really need to look at and start obviously talking to more people about, and happy to talk to any councillors who would like to discuss that in more detail. In terms of the numbers, absolutely transparent about the numbers. Happy to present them at the next panel. I have to do a monthly report to the Energy Saving Trust, and I've started including in that all the feedback from the champions. The champions are giving feedback on various things apart from the number of journeys, the number of miles. I want to try and refine that down so I can identify what journeys what vehicle journeys that's replacing, and then I can probably do some quite accurate figures on the carbon savings and emission savings. So again, happy to bring all of that once it's further developed to the panel and share it.
Excellent, thank you. We'd welcome that, Emily. I think having regular updates, even if you can't always make it, we can at least have the papers to see. Thank you. I have Councillor Peter Chillingworth and Councillor Robert Davidson now, so over to you, Peter.
Thank you very much, Emily. This is really a good news story. During the pandemic, I really think comms could publicise this a bit more. I know it's early days. We aren't really in the sort of work phase. It's more the introductory phase. But even at that stage, as we move on, could we have some good publicity? It might enliven people's dull lives at the moment if this comes from the council. It's just a suggestion anyway.
Can understand some lives may be dull at the moment. It sounded like everyone's lives were dull, but yeah, absolutely, Peter, I get your point. And it's a story where I've tried to spread it. Many people see the absolute benefits to the community, to themselves, etc. So thank you for that. I'll take Robert as well, and then I'll come back to Emily. Thank you, Robert.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Yes, Emily, very, very encouraging, all that. And I hadn't realised there was so much diversity in the design of the bikes, but effectively you can make it fit any use, I should have thought. Very good. A couple of 3 or 4 points, really. First of all, some of the people you got on the list of showing some interest were what I'd call commercial companies that actually probably could quite easily afford to buy their own. They might want your support to show them the way and tell them, get the training and everything else. But I'd like to see, some commercial sponsorship coming in there to expand the scheme, if possible. The other thing is on the cost. All of us as councillors, we have various contacts across the borough. If we had some idea of what sort of cost bracket they're in and the trailers as well, we could then spread the news as well as we could. And I notice you're quite heavily into Wivenhoe. which admittedly has got a hill in it. But actually, you've got West Mersey and Tiptree, which are also substantial parishes. Both of the parish councils there employ staff, and I'd have thought they'd be ideal candidates for doing general maintenance and general parish work. So you know, I'm sure there's lots of scope to expand the scheme if we could just identify and work with partners. The last thing really was, if people are wanting to get really fit, or if they're like the leader and fit already, actually why can't we work with Recycle? Because we don't have to use electric bikes. You know, some of the traditional Dutch type bikes had fairly large carrying capacity. You can always put a trailer on the rear of them as well, and they would be more than happy to oblige supplying you with what you needed there. And it's a local company, and it's recycling, which is rather than buying new, because of course the electricity charge for the bikes does actually cost money, and it does use carbon to produce it. That's all. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, Robert. A lot there. I'll come to you, Emily, in a second. I've just got Councillor Lorcan Whitehead's just come in, but I know there's a few things you want to come back on there. Lorcan first, please.
Thank you. Yes, I wondered if we might be able to hear from Lee Pugh as a user of the bikes. And I mean, I've followed a little bit on Facebook some of the updates, and yeah, very positive. It looks like he's enjoying using them. And I just wondered, you know, if he could give us a bit of perspective on his views so far for the potential for these kinds of vehicles.
Absolutely, thank you. I'll come to you now, Lee, because I see you pop on Facebook a lot as well, and I try and like as much as I can. You seem to be doing a good job getting the news out there, and we've got the committee suggesting today we need to do more of that. So if you would just want to give us very much the highlights of your experience so far, and then I'll go back to Emily. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Chair, good evening. Members, officers, good evening. Everyone hear me okay? Yeah, from the outset then, first and foremost, what I would say and what I would emphasize is really how very easy and absolutely straightforward it is to get all around Colchester on these bikes. And those that have followed and have seen some of my routes would see that I've done a 9-mile route, I've done a 15-mile route, I've done a 20-mile route, I've done a 30-mile route. So it is absolutely straightforward and easy, and these bikes have the potential to make a great difference. From a user, in terms of being involved in this project, it's very exciting to have the opportunity to be a champion, and you can expect me, Enform, and us to play our part in really pushing and promoting that along the lines some other members have mentioned is absolutely necessary. I say also, our experience at dealing with Emily and Mike on a practical level has been really excellent, very supportive, and very positive, and moved quite quickly as well. I know some people might think that it's been slow, but from our point of view, it's moved quite quickly. And also, I would say how excellent and positive it has been to receive support from councillors, and I'm not trying to push that aspect, because whilst the financial support is really useful and will enable us to push into areas where it might have previously taken us longer to raise the funds to do, the practical the kind of practical advice and support that we've been given as well has been really helpful, definitely. Yeah. So there's then, just very quickly, there are two sides to it. There's this side, somebody's mentioned, I think, businesses. There's this side where, for no money at all, a local business can have engage with a delivery service. And when I say no money at all, unlike the Deliveroo, where a business might be required to come up with 500 quid as a sign-up fee, and then be paying 30%, 20% in terms of commission on a regular basis on the sales. We don't need any of that. We need them to just promote us and we'll promote them. And we find that their customers have been quite happy to pay £2, £3, because that's all it is to have a delivery from the town centre or from one side of Colchester to another. That's all it is at the moment. So there's absolutely that aspect. As long as that aspect would continue, and with the other support, the other financial support we get, that will mean that 2 days a week or more, probably we'll be able to deliver this food bank, tots and teens, and other community support group COVID response activity and ongoing as well.
Thank you, Lee. That's really helpful, and I can see your enthusiasm that comes through on your post, but also here this evening. So thank you for that, and we want to see you continuing on supporting the different organisations that you do, and yeah, with businesses as well locally as much as possible. And Robert referred to some of that, and Emily, I'd like you to come back now to some of those points about further sponsorship or commercial interest, as well as the other great organisations. So over to you, Emily, to come back, please.
Okay, so just sort of to touch on the publicity, now we are sort of ready for the pool bikes to go out. I think we can start ramping up the publicity, and part of the role of the champions that, they're using one of our bikes, they've got it on free long-term loan in exchange for helping us with the publicity. So that's why some of you would have seen them on social media, but we can start doing some more coordinated work with them to promote things. Obviously the original intention had been, events and this sort of thing, so we're kind of having to adapt everything to our current COVID situation, which obviously is quite reliant on social media and sort of newspapers and things. I think that we've had the press releases to date, but obviously we could do more with that, especially if we focus on the champions, because they've got the actual stories about usage. So definitely ready to ramp all that up and get more information out there, as well as sharing more information with councillors, as it's been apparent tonight that we need to get more information about the scheme and about the bikeability and everything else. So in terms of the other questions, the pool bikes are all to be let out for short-term loans, so it would be 1 to 3 months. So the idea is that a commercial business or any business organisation can borrow the bike on a short-term trial, and the idea is that they try it out, and then obviously they would go away, and if they're interested, look at purchasing one for themselves. I haven't explored the idea of sort of corporate sponsorship, but that's something we can look at. But it's a bit of a kind of try before you buy type scheme. It gives people the opportunity to try different bikes, see how it works for their businesses, and then hopefully they'll go away and make that investment themselves. It's quite a wide range in terms of the cost. So something like the Christiana that the Norwegian Bakers have got, that's sort of one of the cheapest ones, sort of about £2,500. I say cheap, not that cheap, £2,500. But then, the bigger ones up to sort of £8,000 or £9,000. So there's a huge range in cost depending on what you want and what your needs are. So it's quite a big outlay, but then if you compare that to a van or a vehicle, it isn't so much, and obviously there's all the other benefits that come with it. In terms of promoting them further afield, interestingly, we have had some contact with West Mersey, who were very interested in Wivenhoe and the Shorty. So I mean, there is, Wivenhoe Town Council could borrow one and trial one as well. That wouldn't be a problem. We can arrange that. And I think the more different organisations and businesses and charities that can try them out, we can then look at opportunities for future funding, whether that's commercial funding or whether that's bidding for other funding opportunities to get more in. I'm really interested in having them available for residents to use as well, and we're looking for funding opportunities to do that, because this one is restricted to businesses and formal organisations. So I think this is just the beginning, and there's huge scope, and the more they get out there and the more people that try them and the more the barriers are broken down to their usage, then we can look to obviously grow it and normalise it in Colchester. In terms of Recycle, we do already work closely with Recycle. We promote them a lot through our Cycle Colchester newsletter. We are always with contacts and with our travel plan club members, always making them aware of Recycle, but obviously as a route for buying a second-hand bike, we promote them as well, but always looking at new opportunities to work with them as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily. Again, really positive and informative. I think you misspoke saying about Wivenhoe Town Council. We are piloting them, but West Mersey, it's hard to say the difference, to take that on as a parish council. So I think you've covered everything there. The one thing I would say is, so if we've got organisations who are interested, we come to you, Emily. There's more capacity to come post-COVID, hopefully, for more people to take it on.
We've got the 6, so I think we've got 7 at the moment pool bikes that can go out. So basically, I will, anyone that's interested, please put them forward to me. I'll talk to them, see what their needs are, see what bike would be suitable, give them a test ride. And then obviously we may have a waiting list, we may not. If we do have a waiting list, we'll restrict loans to 1 month. If we don't have a waiting list, we'll let people borrow them for a bit longer if they want to, so they've got a bit longer to test them. So it's very, very flexible. The main objective is just to get as many people trying them and interested in them as possible. So yeah, please pass anyone that's interested.
Perfect, thank you. That's really helpful. To have it for a month is clearly a good period of time to test it. 3 months, great. But if we've got a waiting list, then absolutely keep cycling it on. Okay, excellent. Thank you for the report. Thank you for the enthusiasm. Thank you, Lee, for coming along as well. I'll keep liking your posts and seeing you whiz around Colchester. Thank you all. Thanks for your contribution, councillors. Emily and Lee, thank you. We'll move on to acknowledge this report. Matthew, again, is this one for noting rather than voting?
Yes, Chair, it is. If you're happy again to do by assent, that's absolutely fine.
Okay, I think we're all happy with this and nods. Excellent.
Yes.
We've got to that time. It's gone 8 o'clock. Where Robert's dinner is sitting there getting cold if he hasn't eaten it already. So shall we take a 10-minute break, a comfort break, and we'll come back and hopefully concisely get through the rest of the agenda. Okay, we'll come back at 10 minutes. So I'll see you at 8:18, ready to go for 8:20. Thank you.
Hello, all. I just wanted to check. I've just put my headphones in. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, you're absolutely fine, Maggie. Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you.
Okay, I hope some of us are ready to get going shortly. Don't know about you, but I've just had a mouthful of food. I hope yours was nice, Robert, and wasn't too cold. Good. Just wait for Lee and Lorcan just to come on as well, so I know we've got everybody. I will get going again because we need to plough on, and we've got 2 substantive items in the work programme still to go. So, and Maggie, we can definitely hear you, which is great, loud and clear. So it's over to you for the next item, which is the review of the environmental sustainability strategy proposal for new framework. So Maggie, over to you, please.
Thank you very much. Yes, I've heard your call for a concise overview of the report. So thank you for this opportunity. We've recognized that there's a need for a new framework that brings all of our work around sustainability, carbon reduction, and climate change together, especially as the environmental sustainability strategy has come to an end in 2020. So this report mainly highlights the process that we've gone through to develop a new framework. So as you can see, there's been a review of key documents such as the strategic plan, 2020 to 2023, as I said, the environmental sustainability strategy, the carbon management plan, and our climate emergency action plan, all of which had strategic elements within it. The review has come out highlighting that there are certain themes around sectors that we work on, and the need also to include an element around monitoring and evaluation, so progress and accountability. So the request here is to agree that the sustainability and climate emergency response framework, as outlined in the report, be developed for the next panel, as well as an updating of the climate emergency action plan, which would emulate the agreed upon themes. So what you have in front of you are some themes that we've proposed. Some of the themes will be tweaked slightly for language and coherence and clarity to the public generally, so that each item on its own makes sense as a standalone. So not to get too much into the detail on the language of the themes, but to hear that you are in support of this reviewed proposal for a new framework and the updating of the climate emergency action plan according to the framework themes.
Thank you, Maggie. Yes, I support the themes, and I support the rationalisation of the different strategies into one clear strategy with one clear action plan underneath it, carrying out the operational changes we need to make. So for me, it makes sense. The themes, as you say, let's not fuss about the wording, but the themes are absolutely covering everything that I want to see this panel and this council achieve, and for the borough to achieve. Again, we don't need to rank the order of them. They're all high priorities, but I think they really hit the spot. So I'm really supportive of this. And as I say, to have it organized in a way that we have a strategy and a framework, and then we have an action plan, that's absolutely clear. And we've got the carbon management plan as well, that's quite specific, with which we work with the Carbon Trust on. So just asking other councillors, I haven't seen any hands yet, but we took this, of course, to the spokesperson's briefing, where again, we were happy with the themes and the way it was going. Councillor Chillingworth, you were one of them. I'll come to you.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Yes, Maggie, thank you very much for the presentation. I think it's important to simplify the present. We have several strategies, the strategic elements can go in one, and the action carbon management plan, which should have actions which are quantifiable, which can be monitored, and we can see progress. So yes, I support the review.
Thank you. Silence from others, so I assume support for it. Oh, Councillor Hazel, with your real hand, over to you.
Yes, sorry, Chair. Yes, I can't see anything wrong at all with this report. I think it makes perfect sense to coordinate everything. So I'm very happy with the plan going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hazel. I assume by the silence everyone else is happy with this, so we can back Maggie's sort of rationalisation and clear guidance ahead with the strategy, and you'll bring it to the next panel in terms of it being much more fleshed out, the strategy in front of us to work on, and I'm sure you'll gain our views then. So anything more, Maggie, that you want to add?
I actually just will take this opportunity to clarify one point of information, if I may. So we've got the Climate Emergency Action Plan, which is how we will deliver the strategy. The Carbon Management Plan will sit within the Climate Emergency Action Plan. So what I've heard is that we really, want to pull everything together. So just taking that feedback on board, what you'll see in the forthcoming panel is a strategy document and an action plan according to those strategic themes.
Yeah, and they almost fit underneath each other, don't they, in terms of...
Exactly.
Yeah, that sounds like you've got it in order. You've got responses from Mandy Jones as well saying that's positive. So thank you. So therefore, again, this is more of well, we agree to vote to go ahead. Mandy, I've seen your hand come up. Do you want to come in quickly?
Yes, I didn't mean to put the thumbs up. I meant to put my hand up. I knew there's new reactions down at the bottom, so apologies for that. Yeah, I think I just wanted to take the opportunity to say I think this is a really positive move, but I think that what we're going to have underneath it is not necessarily a very long strategy, because all of the elements, as Maggie's pointed to, they're part of the strategic plan anyway, and they're part of the climate action plan. So what we're going to do is create a very short, punchy climate emergency strategic response document, which all the actions sit underneath. So it's not going to be a very long strategy. It just needs to bring it all together under those themes, I think, strategically.
I think you're right, and I think we agree with that. Clear vision, clear strategy, with our principles that then get delivered through the action plans and the carbon reduction management plan as well. Okay, excellent, thank you. So can I take nods and thumbs up as agreement to this, please? Excellent, all happy. Matthew, unless you're not happy, if that's clear enough guidance, please tell me otherwise. Otherwise, I think we're all in agreement. So thank you, Maggie. We agree that, and we look forward to seeing the strategy at the next meeting. Excellent, thank you. On to the next agenda item, which is the review and update from Ben on the Climate Emergency Action Plan. So Ben, over to you, please.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. So just going through a few sort of key updates relevant to the action plan since the last meeting. So at the last meeting, we brought the Carbon Trust along, and we talked about a carbon management plan going forward and the principles sort of that will follow. So we received a proposal from the Carbon Trust, the formal proposal in January, which we are now currently reviewing. But several sort of key principles, as we mentioned before, will be there. Setting emissions reduction target for the council for 2023 to ensure that we stay on target for our overall net zero emissions target by 2030. Sorry. So I think it's important to monitor that and ensure we sort of stay in line in between the sort of period. A review of options for offsetting carbon emissions. I think we want to be transparent about this, that we will obviously go as far as possible to reduce our carbon emissions as far as we can go, but there will have to be some form of offsetting in there, and we need to understand and agree our principles sort of for doing that. So we will be exploring that hopefully with the Carbon Trust to help with that. And then beyond 2023, we'll be looking at just exploring what other areas will need to be focused on sort of broadly in a sense. And yes, the timeline's been set out there for that work, which might be slightly reviewed, but we'll roughly follow that hopefully. The air quality project, so this has brought a couple of meetings back, an update on that project. This is hopefully some of this content should respond to some of the questions by councillors, and we'll also have Emily coming in briefly at the end to add a little bit more extra detail. So to quickly sort of breeze over it, because I'm sure you've received most of this before, the air quality project, one of the elements of that is to do with signage, to encourage no idling around the town centre, trialing different messages on the signs to see how this affects different people's behaviour. And the planning application for signage was approved, and that will be going ahead relatively soon, at the start of February, with the start of the signage going up. And research assistants will be around that area, trained research assistants to monitor behaviours and also monitor the air pollution through wearing mobile pollution sensors on their bodies. And a lot of the training, I think, has been done for that, so that will be up and running very, very soon. And then another part of the air quality project, which we got funding for, was to explore about traffic light timers and whether we could use those to show people how long they'd be waiting at traffic lights, so that would also affect the and promote no idling. If they knew they were going to be waiting at a traffic light for a long time, they knew they'd be more likely to turn their engine off. That came from a sort of a survey response. And that's been explored with Essex County Council and the Transport Research Laboratory. Unfortunately, the way that the traffic lights are configured in Colchester doesn't lend itself to the application that we would have liked to, and that's explained in the report. But we are exploring alternative options for doing that, including having an electronic message board alongside the traffic lights that gives an approximate waiting time rather than an exact waiting time, which may be of benefit. And I think that was it. And then I'm just going to bring in Emily briefly, because one of the points that was brought up last time was about the clearness of signage along the roadside and making sure that was really obvious in terms of promoting that no idling behaviour. So I'll just bring in Emily, and hopefully a visual of the sign can be put up so you can comment.
Thank you, Ben. Yes, if you remember when the presentation was made before, we discussed the posters and how people had put posters up in their windows to try and encourage people driving past to turn off their engines. And a lot of posters have been placed in a shop window at the bottom of Brook Street. And as councillors rightly pointed out, it really wasn't very clear that it was indicating that they should switch off their engines. And I think Meadows explained that that wasn't its intended purpose when it was designed. It was more designed for workplaces and places where people could actually be close up and read it. So Meadows had been working on a new poster, so that's been put up on the screen. Obviously it's a lot clearer. It's just got the instruction to switch off the engine along with the logo. So that's going to be printed, and we'll start circulating that and making that available to people to use. Just in terms of the sort of logo and how everything's being used, the formal signage, obviously, that Ben mentioned with the psychological messages are going up during February, and these messages are explicit in saying why a driver should switch off their engine. But with the media campaign, to clarify, our main target audience is local residents who are regularly driving through the AQMA rather than visitors to Colchester. And so the imagery with the car and the exhaust is the visual prompt that we're working to promote through the media campaign, and to get local residents familiar with that image, so that over the course of the project they start associating the visual as a standalone, as a mental prompt to switch off their engine. And then this will be reinforced as the project progresses and beyond the life of the project through the ongoing volunteer action that we're working on. I think also some questions were asked about translating materials and having them available for non-English speakers. We have actually been working with the mosque to translate the materials into other languages, particularly because a lot of their congregation are local taxi drivers. So we're looking at translating the materials into Urdu and possibly some other languages that are spoken by local residents. So that's just a quick update from me. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily, on that. And councillors can come back to Emily afterwards if you have anything about that. Just to quickly finish the report on other items, this one was just to note really that the council is refreshing its asset management strategy for the housing stock at the moment, and the refresh strategy will go to Cabinet in September 2021, with the sort of duration of the strategy running between April 2022 and March 2027. Bringing this up really just to say that environmental, as part of the climate emergency declaration, of course, that the asset management strategy will reflect the climate emergency and will seek to be very environmentally sustainable. Next one, we talked briefly about this at the last meeting to do with the fleet. The council is due to go out to tender shortly for the installation of electric vehicle charging points. There might be a slight development on that. I'm not 100% sure, but that is still a thing for the electric vehicle charging points at Rowan House, which obviously support the transition to electric vehicles. At the previous meeting, it was discussed whether the council could look to benchmark our greenhouse gas emissions against other local authorities to look at progress on that agenda. And the Local Government Association are actually running an exercise on that now. So we have submitted data for that, and we'll see which other local authorities add their data, which we can then compare against. This is quite a small point, but it was quite nice when I received the update. It was positive about the Highwoods Country Park team purchasing an electric chainsaw to replace a petrol chainsaw that they used to use. It was just a really good example. I think a good first step of staff looking to consider switching to greener products when replacing any products, or just sort of greener principles in purchasing and procurement in general. And I think that's what we'll be trying to push forward a lot more. Things like in procurement specifications being a lot clearer about some of the things that we would like to see from contractors, and just promoting that, because I think in previous reports that we've shown about our sort of scope 3 emissions, we know that the procured goods and services is quite a high contributor, so it's important that we push that forward. And the last point, I'm just going to hand over to Maggie to go through.
Yes, so I'm really pleased to say that we've set up a Climate Opportunities Working Group. We've done that for a couple of reasons, mainly to help drive the implementation of the Climate Emergency Action Plan and ensure that the progress reports going forward continue to be rigorous and robust, with all the updates for the panel and also for our board. The other reason was to fulfill one of the action points in and of themselves in terms of building capacity of staff and changing behavior of staff. So this working group is comprised across the organization with representatives from different teams and companies. And the ambition is to create this working group that becomes almost a community of practice, where it can share knowledge and ask questions and build on the strength from different areas of the organization, and really create that cross communication platform. So we will keep you updated on how that progresses as well.
And that's the end of the update.
Thank you, Ben, and thank you, Maggie. Lots there for us to be updated on, so thank you. I would just focus on the points of systemic change that we're seeing throughout the organisation, and thank you for that, the influence on that. That's what we want to see and want to lead by example. So thank you for the explanation of the new working group within the council, and the small example of the electric chainsaw. as I said, a bit ironic, but only cutting down trees when they need to be and to improve the management of our woodland. But I think those examples are where we need to see systemically across the council changes in procurement. We've done that from a cabinet level in terms of how we contract now and how we write reports, but it's good to see it coming into action. So thank you. I'll go to Robert first and then to Peter. Robert, please.
Thank you very much. Yes, an encouraging report. Thank you very much, Ben. Couple of points I just want to make. The poster is better, but forgive me, it's got very large margins around the outside with nothing on, and actually the cramped writing in the exhaust fumes, if you like, is going to be very difficult to read when you're in a car or in a truck or a lorry or a bus, which is even. So all I'd ask is that you maximize the wording before you print them if you can. And I presume they're going to be A4 size, but perhaps you're going to make larger ones, I'm not sure. But there's plenty of room on the right-hand side and a bit on the left-hand side to make the wording bigger. Thank you. The other point I was going to make was the charging points at Rowan House. And I suppose perhaps I ought to be asking the leader whether he's considered opening that at weekends so that the public can have access to it and actually perhaps even encourage a bit more income to the council. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. I'll answer that directly. Yes, we have thought about it. It is something that has been entertained as part of our parking strategy and something that Mike Linney is working on in his portfolio. So it is something we have entertained, and especially once those charging points come in, definitely a good point that we will look into, continue to look into. So hopefully we'd get some news on that. Thank you, Robert. I think the posters are A3 by standard, but we can take those points back. I'm sure you will, Ben. Thank you. I'll go to Peter now, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Just to make the point that this review is now going to be a regular item on each of our panel meetings, so we can monitor what's going on, but also the public who may follow this with hopefully greater interest in the future will be able to see what the council is doing on a regular basis. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. And Mark Gocher, please. Mark.
Thank you, and thanks, Ben, for the report. It's interesting reading. I just want to talk about the air pollution points again. I completely agree with Councillor Davidson that if the text could be made a bit bigger, then that would be welcome. I'm just conscious of the attention that the average driver is likely to give it. It has to be as instant as possible. So I'd concur with that. I'm very enthused by the idea of the mobile monitors, and I liked the fact that it said in the report that when they're not being used by the research assistants, they will be available to schools. I think that's an excellent point. I'm just wondering if there's any possibility of them being available to volunteers as well, although schools have to be the priority, I think, there. The other point I would make is that you say that the target group are those that are making very short journeys in the town, and there's a lot of that. I think I'm right in remembering that it's at least 50% of the journeys, but I think I've got a memory of it might be even higher than that, are just very short journeys, people travelling in town. I can think of several colleagues who do it. Who are perfectly capable of walking to our place of work. So what I'm just saying is that in the actual messaging, not necessarily on the poster, but in the wider messaging, I think we have to not just talk about switching off engines. We have to be talking about, do you need to be making the journey? I'm not suggesting in a very kind of schoolmastery way, but in the sense of, have you thought how healthier it might be if you walked at least a couple of days a week these very short journeys, just for health purposes? Something that's a bit psychologically more positive than don't use the car, which is very negative. So those would be my points, but thanks very much for the report.
Thank you, Mark. And I'll go to Lee and then back to Ben. Thank you. Lee.
Thanks, Chairman. I mean, my only comments on the poster, when I saw it, I thought it was an improvement, but my first thought when I saw the statement was why? Why should I turn my engine off? And I'm just wondering, could we add 2 points underneath, such as save petrol, help the environment? Something quite simple that, first of all, there's a carrot, and then a very simple just messaging about this is why we're doing it as well. Because, I mean, Councillor Goach has made the point, most people are doing short journeys. Because it's easy, it's that kind of idea that actually if they're going to save petrol, they're probably more likely to turn the engine off. And just another idea, as we are monitoring this now, would it be an idea that every month we put the data up of the pollution figures to kind of say we're taking this seriously, just to say, you know, this is where we are this week, we've improved upon it by this much, or it's increased by this much. We really need people to change their habits. Just wondering if that's an idea we could look at moving forward. Obviously a bit hard in what's going on and lockdown, and we're likely to see a huge increase when it does lift a bit, although traffic is still high. But just thinking in the future, in a post-COVID world, it might be a good idea.
Thank you, Lee. A useful point. Ben, could you summarise those concisely for us, please? Thank you.
Yeah, I will probably refer you to Emily for most of it, just because she's more day-to-day involved with the air quality project than I am. But I think there's some useful comments. And I think just to pick up on Mark's one specifically about the promotion of walking and cycling more generally alongside these no idling messages, I think that's important. And I think that is another element of the project that we haven't provided actually an update on tonight, about the working with a resident group to promote walking and cycling to the town centre. Maybe Emily can add a little bit more on that as well, but that's also a key element of the project.
Thank you, Ben. Emily, if you're still there and available just to come forward and give a few short, sharp responses to those, please. Thank you.
Yeah. So in terms of the poster, I'll take the feedback back. I think we're looking at A3 and larger, because the idea of that poster was just for the quick visual as you go past. And this, you know, once you start associating the image with the mental prompts, then it doesn't matter so much whether you see the wording. So I think there's a balance to be had. We have the poster that has more information and a bit more about why. And then we have the image that is the quick drive-by image that hopefully will become a mental prompt. But I would add that the signage project that will be going up in February is all about those psychological messages about why. So those will be more of a, you know, the mental, the self-efficacy and the looking after your own health, those kind of messages. So I think, you know, the different posters have different a different impact and a different approach, I guess. So but I will give the feedback back about whether we can make more use of the space on the sign. In terms of the walking and cycling, obviously a big chunk of the project was on the no idling, because that's the thing that everyone can do, and this should appeal to most drivers because there's not a sort of good reason to not do it. We're sort of focusing on the walking and cycling with the more bespoke work with the schools and with the resident area, where we're focusing on Monkwick, because they've got a good route into the town centre that you can go by bike on, that's off-road and isn't broken up in terms of the route. So that work has been a little bit hampered by the COVID restrictions and lockdown, so we've been sort of dipping in and out with the schools, but there we have developed a schools toolkit, and part of that is around promoting walking and cycling as well. And then we were doing the Bikeability Plus project, or we are still doing it, but again that's gone on hold because of the schools all closing. So it's a little bit of a stop-start process, but we're trying to maintain those relationships with the schools and build up a relationship with the Monkwick community to pursue those walking and cycling focuses. In terms of pollution feedback, I'll have to go back to the team with that. We've got to obviously get these, we've got the pollution monitors, we've got to start using them and see how they present the data and how we can use the data and analyse it. So we'll probably have to report back on that in due course once we've had a chance to actually use them, and we've got a bit of data back to analyse and see what they're showing. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily. Very helpful responses there. Robert, just to come in finally, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Emily, if I could just have a bit more input into the signage, please. I was thinking about colour blindness and everything else. At the moment, you've got a yellow background with black print. I'm thinking about road signage, and effectively, you have a red border around it, you know, an inch border or something, and then you could have white as a background with black imaging, and that would be far more bold and effective rather than the pleasant yellow.
The yellow is a very good Lib Dem colour, Robert, of course, and that's why I ensured that would be a poster. No, I'm only joking.
Even another reason to get rid of it then.
Of course. Thank you, Robert. Emily, I'm sure you'll take that back to the experts, but any immediate thoughts?
I think obviously we've already done the branding and it's on the yellow. I don't think we can change the branding at this point because obviously we're quite far into the project. In terms of the signs that are going on the road, I'm trying to remember what colour the background, I think that might be yellow as well, but I think we can look at that in terms of the signage that's going on the road, because obviously that's more in compliance with signage regulations that we have to follow. But I think in terms of the main project, to change the branding would be a bit of a major difficulty, given that we're that far into the project that we are now.
Thank you for letting me have an input. And sorry, picking up Lee's point, save fuel, save lives is the key message underneath that, I've thought. Thank you.
Thank you. Another good point there. Improving on Lee's one, that combined, that's a good phraseology to use. But I assume, as Emily, you said, that will come in the sort of second phase of some of that work. Sorry, you unmuted and muted again.
Sorry. We're working with the University of Essex, their evaluation partner, and the messages that we're testing initially are tried and tested messages, psychological messages that have been found to be most effective. And the Save Fuel one actually was the least effective of the ones that have been researched to date. But part of the project will be to look at the new normal and obviously whether there's some other messages that we might like to test, given the situation we're in now, where, you know, fuel might become, the savings might become something that's more persuasive to people. So I think we'll be starting off with the messages that we want to test for a longer study, and then we'll look. We've got a psychologist specialist who's working with us on the project to look at what will elicit the most behaviour change. So that's a kind of a key part of the project, the psychological aspect of this. Thanks.
Thank you, Robert, and thank you for that explanation about the University of Essex taking part, and we'll follow the science on this one, absolutely. Okay, thank you. Are there any other further comments? I think between you, Ben, and Emily, you've given us lots to update with, and as Peter says, we get this regularly as an update of the different work streams that are happening. So thank you to you, Ben, for that in advance as well. So again, we will note this report and thank the officers for the update. So please nod in agreement or tell me if there's any dissent that you, okay. Good to see you nodding. Thank you. We'll move on to the last item on the agenda, which is the work programme. Again, we discussed this as spokespersons, so we have gone through this and believe that we've got on the work programme everything we need. Matthew, was there something I asked you to add or remind me of? I'm struggling to remember after a second late night.
Yes, Chair. There are going to be two items added, proposed to the work programme for the next meeting. The first one we discussed this evening, which is the new Environment Sustainability Strategy document with the action plan report to be returned. And the other item was one that you wanted to raise, which was letter to MPs concerning tackling harmful bee pesticides. So that would go on as an item as well if the panel was minded to approve that tonight.
Thank you. I should have remembered I wore my bee and butterfly tie especially for it. But yes, I just wanted again to look at a sort of cross-party strategy on that particular use of pesticide that could affect our pollinators. And I wasn't going to push that one through so quickly. I thought that you might want to look at that one for a bit longer. So we'll have a look at that. I have shared the letters that I've already sent and I'm more than willing to look at how we address those letters in a different way. And again, it's about being supportive to our national government, saying what we feel would be a right approach. On the B question and the update on the strategy, we've all welcomed that coming next meeting. So are there any other points to bring up?
Nothing from my side, Chair.
Thank you, Matthew, and it seems nothing from councillors as well. So we're happy with the work programme going forward, and we'll adjust that if we need to at the next spokesperson's meeting. Okay, thank you. Good, excellent. Well, I think that brings us right to the end of the agenda. Thank you for your patience and your involvement this evening, and I wish you good night. So thank you all.
Good night, Chairman.
Good night. Thank you.
Yeah.